I grew up in Oregon, in a small town surrounded by dense pine forests. When I was a kid, those woods felt like a second home. My friends and I would spend hours exploring the trails, building forts, and daring each other to venture deeper than we ever had before. But one night, when I was 17, something happened that made me swear I'd never set foot in those woods again. It was the middle of July, and my buddy Drew had this idea to go camping out by Devil's Hollow, a clearing deep in the forest, maybe a 3-hour hike from the nearest road. The place had a bit of a reputation in town. People said weird things happened there, and some locals swore it was cursed. Of course, being a group of overconfident teenagers, we didn't take any of it seriously. There were 4 of us, me, Drew, Marcus, and Kyle. We left around noon, carrying way too much gear for a one-night trip. The hike was tougher than we expected, and by the time we reached Devil's Hollow, the sun was already low in the sky. The clearing was eerie, dead silent, except for the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. The tall pine trees around us seemed to lean inward, like they were closing us off from the rest of the world. We set up camp, made a fire, and spent the evening swapping ghost stories and drinking cheap beer Marcus had stolen from his older brother. Around midnight, things started to get weird. It started with the sounds. At first, it was just little things, a distant rustling, like an animal moving through the underbrush. But then it got closer, heavier, more deliberate. It wasn't like a deer or a raccoon. Whatever it was, it moved with purpose, circling just beyond the light of our fire. Kyle kept insisting it was probably a bear, but none of us believed that. The thing never made any grunting noises, no heavy breathing, no snuffling like you'd expect from a bear. It was quiet, too quiet. Then it mimicked us. I swear to God, I heard my own voice coming from the darkness. At first, it was subtle, a laugh that sounded exactly like mine, but twisted, stretched out, slow and unnatural. There was Drew's voice, calling out from the trees. "Hey guys, over here." But Drew was sitting right next to me. We all froze. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and our breathing. Drew's face went pale and he whispered, "You heard that too, right?" Marcus grabbed the hatchet we brought for firewood and shone his flashlight toward the tree line. But the beam didn't reach far before being swallowed by the dense forest. For a moment, everything went still, and then something stepped into the light. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with grayish, mottled skin stretched in over a skeletal frame. Its face, if you could call it that, was an impossible mess of human and animal features. Long, stringy hair hung over empty, sunken eyes, and its mouth was too wide, filled with jagged yellow teeth. But the worst part was that it was wearing Kyle's hoodie, the same exact one he had in his pack. None of us had ever screamed like that before. We bolted, no plan, no direction, just pure survival instinct. I don't even remember grabbing my flashlight or pack. The only thing I cared about was getting as far away from that thing as possible. The forest was pitch black, and in our panic, we got separated. I remember crashing through branches and slipping on rocks, the thing's heavy footsteps behind me, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Every so often, it would call out in one of our voices, "Help, I'm hurt," or "Wait up, man." But I knew better. After what felt like hours, I stumbled onto a logging road, half delirious and covered in scratches. I collapsed there, too exhausted to move. It wasn't long before headlights appeared, and an old forest ranger named Jim picked me up. I don't even remember what I said to him, just bits and pieces about the thing in the woods. He got me back to town and called in a search party. They found Drew and Marcus the next morning, both alive, though Marcus had a deep gash in his arm from falling during the escape. Kyle they never found. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. A week later, one of the searchers, an older guy named Pete, went missing while looking for clues near Devil's Hollow. The only thing they found was his flashlight and a scrap of cloth from Kyle's hoodie. Since then, no one's gone back there. The Forest Service eventually sealed off the old trail leading to the hollow, claiming it was due to dangerous wildlife activity. But people in town know better. Sometimes, on still nights, hikers near that part of the forest claim to hear voices. Familiar ones, calling out from the darkness. I haven't stepped foot in those woods in over 10 years. And I never will.
I don't think we're alone out here." Those were the last words my friend Max whispered to me before we both froze, our breaths hanging like pale ghosts in the chilly forest air. The campfire crackled weakly, the flames casting jittery shadows against the towering pines surrounding our campsite. We had been out here for 2 nights already, miles away from the nearest road, relishing the isolation. But now, that same isolation felt like a noose tightening around our necks. It all started earlier that day. Max and I, along with his younger sister Leah, had decided to hike further into the forest to explore an area we'd marked on our map, a clearing nestled between 2 ridges. The trail was faint, overgrown in parts, and the deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. Even the usual chatter of birds and insects seemed muted, as if something unseen had pressed a finger to its lips. The clearing was beautiful, though, wildflowers scattered across the grass, framed by jagged rocks. We set up camp and spent the afternoon cooking and joking around. But by dusk, a subtle unease had crept into my mind. Leah had wandered off to gather firewood and returned looking pale, her arms loaded with sticks. "There's something weird out here," she muttered, dropping the wood at my feet. "What do you mean?" I asked. She hesitated. "It's like I'm being watched. Every time I turned around, I thought I saw someone in the trees. But when I looked, nothing was there." Max laughed it off. "You've been watching too many horror movies." But Leah's unease stuck with me. As night fell, we circled the fire, telling stories and roasting marshmallows. The wind had picked up, rustling the branches overhead. It was during one of those lulls, between laughter and crackling wood, that I heard it, a faint snap, like a branch breaking underfoot. I turned sharply, peering into the dark forest beyond the firelight. "Did you hear that?" Max shrugged. "It's probably just an animal." "Too big for an animal," Leah whispered, inching closer to the fire. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the woods. Nothing. Just endless trees, their shadows stretching and twisting like reaching fingers. "Relax," Max said. "We're in the middle of nowhere. There's no one else out here." But he was wrong. Then, from the edge of the clearing, I saw it, a faint silhouette standing between the trees. It was tall, motionless, almost blending with the shadows. My throat tightened as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "Who's there?" I shouted. No response. Max took a step forward, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't." The figure shifted slightly, as if swaying. And then, with a sudden, unnatural speed, it moved out of sight. "What the hell was that?" Max whispered, his voice barely audible. "We're leaving," I said, my heart hammering. "First thing in the morning." But morning felt like an eternity away. Back in my tent, I clutched a knife I brought for cooking and kept my ears trained for any sound. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, I woke to Leah screaming. Later, as we lay in our tents, I found myself unable to sleep. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, set my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was around midnight when I heard it again, a steady, deliberate crunch of footsteps circling the campsite. My blood turned cold. "Max," I hissed, poking my head out of my tent. He was already sitting up, his face pale. "You hear it too?" We grabbed our flashlights and stepped out, careful not to wake Leah. The fire had died down to embers, and the forest was pitch black. We scanned the perimeter, the beams of our flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" Max called out, his voice trembling. Silence. I bolted out of the tent, flashlight in hand. Leah was standing by the fire pit, her face streaked with tears. "It was in my tent," she sobbed. I woke up, and there was someone crouching there. Max and I exchanged horrified looks. "Pack up," I said, my voice firm despite the fear clawing at my chest. "We're leaving now." We worked quickly, breaking down the tents and shoving our gear into backpacks. All the while, I felt that presence, like unseen eyes boring into my back. The hike back to the car was brutal. The trail we had followed so easily before now seemed foreign and treacherous. The trees pressed in from all sides, and every so often, we heard that same deliberate crunch of footsteps, always just out of sight. At one point, Leah stumbled, and Max bent to help her. That's when I saw it again, about 50 yards away, half hidden behind a tree. The same figure, its head tilted as if observing us. "Ron," I whispered, grabbing Leah's arm. "Ron!" We bolted, the path blurring as adrenaline took over. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it was following us. When we finally reached the car, we piled in and sped off, not stopping until we were miles away. Only then did I let myself breathe. Even now, I can't explain what we saw out there. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person, at least not any kind of person I've ever seen. Sometimes, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear footsteps outside my window. The biting cold of the night air hit me the very moment I stepped out from the comforting warmth of the cabin. The moon hung low, casting silvery shadows that danced eerily among the gnarled trees. It was supposed to be a getaway, a means of escaping the chaos of everyday life. Instead, as I glared into the darkness beyond our patch of light, suddenly the woods seemed to come alive, almost sentient, swallowing the sounds of my friend's laughter behind me. "Are you coming?" Matt yelled from the cabin, his voice seeming to reverberate off the deep forest. I hesitated, staring into thick brambles bordering our clearing, thick with tangled roots and interwoven branches that cast strange shapes in the moonlight. "Yeah, just give me a second," I replied, forcing a smile as I turned toward him. The plan was simple: hike deeper into the woods, do some stargazing, and then head back out into the warmth of the fire. I had done the particular hike a dozen times before, but this time felt different. The air was too still, too charged. Then, that unsettling feeling of being watched began to creep into the back of my mind. I rummaged through my backpack for a flashlight, feeling the chill crawl up my spine as my fingers grazed the cool metal of a small camping knife. As I made my way into the forest, the trees stood threateningly like sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. The distant chirping of crickets abruptly ceased as I ventured further away from the cabin. Probably just my imagination, I thought, shaking my head to dispel the ghostly chill which had taken residence in my chest. After a 10-minute walk, I emerged into an open area that was at the same time enchanting and forbidding, open sky full of stars. The kind of place where ancient tales of horror are whispered by leaves. I switched my flashlight on and its ray cut through the darkness like a knife. My heart was beating fast while I began to circle around. The woods seemed to breathe, shifting in unnatural ways that the wind whipped by with little greeting whispers, instead coming out as sharp hisses. I sat on a log lying on the ground, trying to steady my nerves. It was quiet now, too quiet. The laughter from the cabin had muted into a muffled memory, and I desperately wanted to go back inside, but my legs seemed stuck to the spot. I had an undeniable feeling that something was standing beyond the trees, just waiting for that opportune time to pounce. Just as I was getting up, I heard it, something soft rustling in a generally leftward direction, deeper in the woods. "Matt, is that you?" I called, trying to keep the quaver out of my voice. Silence fell, heavy and malarial, settling around me like a tourniquet. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Then it came again, this time louder. A slow, purposeful crushing of leaves. The shadows lengthened further as I turned my flashlight in that direction, and my heart violently thudded against my rib cage as the light fluttered erratically, casting wild shadows across the trees. I rummaged my surroundings. Just the wind. I muttered to myself, clenching the knife tightly in my sweat-soaked palms. But the sounds grew louder, clearer, like footsteps. I finally summoned the courage to rise to my feet. Something was after me, and I knew it, an instinctive terror tearing at my sanity. I cast the light to my left once more, the beam buckled, showing only swirling darkness defined by the trees. I was suddenly very conscious of how far into the woods I had gone. Seriously, guys, this isn't funny. I yelled again, hoping for just about any sound in response. Slowly, I began to back up, my flashlight held firm. But nobody laughed, nobody answered. All I could hear was the ragged sound of my breathing and crunching that sounded like it moved with me. Just about the time I thought I was back in safely, a shape broke the tree line beside me. My heart arrested an animal? A trick of the light? Then it was there, a giant form, considering and silent, watching me from the cover of darkness. I could hardly see its features, but its eyes. They glowed unnaturally, fixed on me as if weighing me. I stumbled back in alarm, falling to the ground. The flashlight flickered once more and then went out, plunging me into the dark. I scrambled, afraid even the slightest movement would reveal a hiding self. I took a deep, shaky breath, listening intently as the creature stepped closer, moving with deliberation, unnatural silence. Just when I thought I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears, the silence shattered with a blood-curdling scream. My friends had come looking for me. The terror that I felt turned to anger mixed with fear. I had put them in danger too. I sprang to my feet, not caring if the creature was close. I ran in the direction of their voices, shouting out my friends' names, and now the woods were some sort of maze filled with fear and panic. Finally, I found them, and then relief washed over me until I turned back for that last look. There was nothing but silent trees. No glowing eyes, no sound. Just that residual dread, something in that suffocating dark would always be watching. It wasn't until we were safely back in the cabin that I realized the silence in my heart hadn't lifted. Over the next several days, whispers went around amongst them as to what I had seen and heard. But I said nothing then and nothing afterwards either. I would not have dared utter the profundity of that terror from some creature lurking just beyond the shadows. Even now, in the safety of everyday existence, I shun the woods. The thought of entering that isolation, knowing something akin to that could still be out there, waiting, sensing for the moment the darkness would take me again, well, those are terrors I don't care to endure. And each time the trees sway, whispering sweet nothings in the cool night breeze, I can almost hear that slow, deliberate crunching in the distance, waiting patiently for my return.
I once worked late shift at Target, predominantly in electronic sales. It wasn't a bad job. Quiet evenings, for the most part, after 9 o'clock. A couple of last-minute shoppers would buy phone chargers or video games, but overall, it was an easy gig. I worked for roughly a year and genuinely enjoyed it. But one evening, however, continues to make my skin crawl. It was mid-November, just after the store had switched to its extended holiday hours. I was straightening the shelves near the TVs when I noticed someone standing at the very end of the aisle. He wasn't looking at anything, just staring in my direction. He was tall, wearing a gray hoodie with the hood up, and had both hands shoved deep into his pockets. I figured maybe he was just killing time while someone else shopped, so I went back to work. A few minutes later, I saw him again. This time he was standing in the video game aisle, still not touching anything, just watching. I walked over and asked if he needed help finding something. He didn't answer, didn't even move. After a long few seconds, he finally shook his head once, slowly, and walked off toward the small appliances section. I attempted to brush it off, but how he was moving, it was creepy. About 10 minutes after that, I saw him again, but this time he wasn't alone. He was creeping around the end cap by the laptops, and I am convinced that another guy a couple of aisles away was doing exactly that same thing. Both of them would be gone as soon as I took more than a step toward them. By this point, I was glancing down at the sales floor and up at the clock, wishing it would hurry up and get closer to closing time. Then I heard something a soft tapping on the glass of one of the display cases. I spun around and saw the man in the hoodie, crouched down so his face was practically against the glass, looking directly at me through the reflection. His hands remained in his pockets. I asked my manager via walkie, but when she came into electronics, he was once again nowhere to be seen. She asked me to hang out around the register until we closed. A couple minutes before we closed the doors, I spotted him once more standing just outside of the sliding glass doors, peeking through the windows. No bag, no shopping cart, just standing. We locked up, and security escorted me out to my car. The parking lot was fairly deserted, but there was a dark sedan parked all the way in the back with its headlights off. I drove home quickly that evening, glancing in my mirrors the entire time. I never saw him again, but for weeks afterwards, I couldn't help but feel that he was out there, waiting. Aside from that one evening, working for Target was just fine. But that shift lingers in my mind as the creepiest time that I have ever experienced working.